They thought they were humiliating an old woman for a free meal. What they didn't know was that I was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. "Hi, my name is Margaret Maggie Caldwell, and I'm 67 years old. I've lived long enough to know when someone is smiling at you and when they're smiling through you. This is a confession, I guess, or maybe it's a reckoning. Either way, I need to get this off my chest because it still burns in my throat every time I think about it. I'll start where it really began, not in the restaurant, but weeks before, when I should have noticed the warning signs and didn't, because hope can make even a seasoned woman stupid. I'm a widow. 13 years now. My husband, Tom, died quietly in his sleep, the kind of death people say they want, but it leaves the living with all the noise afterward. No kids of my own. We tried. Life said no. So I poured myself into other people's children, other people's lives, and eventually into my younger sister's family like they were my own. My sister Helen's son, Ryan, was the closest thing I ever had to a child. I paid for his braces, his first car, his college textbooks when Helen's second marriage collapsed and money got tight. I never kept score. Love isn't supposed to. Ryan grew up, got a job in tech, married a woman named Brianna. Bright smile, quick laugh, eyes that never quite warmed. She was polite to me in the way people are polite to strangers they don't plan on knowing very long. Still, when Ryan called me 3 weeks before my birthday and said, "Aunt Maggie, we want to take you out somewhere nice," my heart actually fluttered. Some part of me, the foolish, hopeful part, thought, this is what it feels like to be remembered. The restaurant was one of those places where the lighting is low enough to forgive everyone's age and the prices are high enough to remind you exactly who you are. White tablecloths, soft jazz, a hostess with a practiced smile and eyes already scanning for credit cards. I arrived 10 minutes early, old habit. I wore my navy blue dress, the one Tom used to say made me look dangerous. I even put on lipstick, though my hands shook a little doing it. Ryan and Brianna arrived late, 15 minutes. No apology, just a breezy. Parking was insane, as Brianna handed her coat to the server like she owned the place. We sat. We ordered drinks. Ryan barely looked at the menu before choosing a steak that cost more than my weekly groceries. Brianna asked about the wine list and laughed softly at things the waiter said that weren't funny. I tried to keep up. I really did. About 20 minutes in, Brianna leaned toward Ryan and whispered something. He nodded, then turned to me with that tight smile he gets when he's uncomfortable. "Aunt Maggie," he said, lowering his voice, "would you mind stepping outside for just a minute? Brianna's friend is stopping by to say hi, and it's kind of awkward." I blinked. Her friend? "Yeah," Brianna said quickly. "She's going through some stuff. It'll just be a second." I remember the heat in my face, the way my ears rang. People were laughing around us. Glasses clinked. No one was watching, but it felt like everyone was. "Oh," I said, "of course." I stood, smoothing my dress, telling myself not to overthink it. They wouldn't do this on purpose. Ryan wouldn't. Outside, the night air was sharp and smelled like car exhaust and expensive cologne drifting from the doorway. I stood near the valet stand at first, then moved farther away when no one came. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I pulled out my phone. No messages. That's when I walked around the corner and saw them through the window, Ryan laughing, Brianna leaning across the table, her hand on his arm. No extra chair. No friend. They had ordered appetizers, without me. Something in my chest went very still. I didn't go back inside. I walked to my car instead, sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing like I was learning how all over again. I could have left. That would have been the dignified thing, the quiet thing. But then I remembered every check I'd written without asking when it would be paid back. Every "don't worry about it" I'd ever said. Every time I'd told myself love was enough. So I opened the restaurant's website on my phone, and I paid the bill. Not just theirs, everyone's. I tipped generously, then I sat there, waiting. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Ryan's name. "Aunt Maggie, where did you go?" I watched through the glass as the waiter laid the receipt on the table. I watched Brianna's smile falter. I watched Ryan's confusion turn into panic. "I'm in the parking lot," I said calmly. There was a pause. "Did you pay?" "Yes," I said. "Happy birthday to me." They came rushing out, Brianna's heels clicking angrily against the pavement, her face flushed, not embarrassed, just annoyed. "That was completely unnecessary," she snapped. "We were going to handle it." I looked at her, really looked, then I looked at Ryan, who couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sure you were," I said, after dessert. I got in my car and drove away. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that I went home, poured a glass of wine, and slept like a baby. But humiliation doesn't fade that easily, and neither does clarity. That night was just the opening move. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the house make its old noises, the pop of cooling pipes, the tick of the hallway clock, sounds that usually comforted me but now felt like witnesses. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brianna's face when she realized what I'd done. Not shame, not guilt. Calculation. That was the part that stayed with me. By morning, my humiliation had curled into something steadier. Colder. I made coffee, burned my toast, and stood at the sink staring out at the maple tree Tom planted the year we moved in. I thought about how many times I'd told myself I didn't need gratitude, that being useful was enough, that love meant accepting crumbs with a smile. Ryan texted around noon. "We should talk. There's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. I laughed out loud at that, a short, sharp sound that startled even me. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were old bank statements, canceled checks, handwritten notes to myself. Not because I planned revenge back then, God no, but because I was raised by a woman who believed you should always know where your money went. As I flipped through the papers, memories surfaced with each page. Ryan at 17 slumped at my kitchen table, saying he didn't want to be a burden when I slid a check across to him for his SAT prep course. Helen crying on my couch after her divorce, promising she'd pay me back someday, and me saying, "Don't be silly. Love doesn't keep receipts, I used to think. Turns out, wisdom does." Ryan called that evening. I let it ring twice before answering. "Aunt Maggie," he said, voice thick with forced warmth, "Brianna feels terrible about what happened." I pictured her perfectly manicured hand on his arm, guiding the conversation. "Is that so?" I asked. "She didn't mean for you to feel excluded. It just got complicated." "Funny," I said. "It looked very simple from the parking lot." Silence stretched between us. I could hear traffic on his end, maybe pacing. "We were going to invite you back in," he finally said. "When?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. That was my answer. After we hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, resolve. I realized that the worst part wasn't the restaurant or the money. It was the assumption, so casual, so confident, that I would accept whatever role they assigned me. Sit, wait, pay, disappear. Over the next few days, things started to click into place. Brianna stopped liking my posts on Facebook. Ryan canceled our usual Sunday calls, claiming work was crazy. Helen called once, her voice careful, asking if everything was okay. I told her it was. I didn't trust myself not to say more. Then the email came. It was from Ryan, subject line, "Quick question." Inside, a few bland sentences about an investment opportunity he and Brianna were considering. Something about a short-term loan, family helping family. I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for a moment, the old Maggie, the accommodating one, almost answered automatically, almost asked how much, almost said yes. Instead, I closed the laptop and went for a walk. The neighborhood was loud with life. Kids on bikes, dogs barking, a couple arguing softly over groceries. I realized how small my world had become without me noticing, how I'd poured myself into other people's futures until I'd forgotten to tend to my own. By the time I got home, I knew what I was going to do. I replied to Ryan's email with 3 words, "Let's discuss details." That was the hook, and they took it eagerly. We met a week later at my house. Brianna hugged me too tightly, perfume sharp and sweet, her smile stretched like plastic wrap. Ryan avoided my eyes as we sat at the dining table, the same one where he'd done homework as a boy. They talked numbers, percentages, promises. Brianna did most of the talking, her hands moving confidently, like she was already spending money that wasn't hers. I listened. I nodded. I asked questions. And all the while, I watched them relax, watched them settle back into the familiar assumption that I would come through. When Brianna finally paused and said, "So, what do you think?" I folded my hands in my lap. "I think," I said slowly, "that it's time we talked about expectations." Ryan looked up then, startled. Brianna's smile faltered, just for a second. "I've been thinking a lot about family," I continued, "about what we owe each other, about respect." The room felt suddenly smaller, heavier. "That dinner," I said, meeting Ryan's eyes now, "wasn't just rude, it was revealing." Brianna's jaw tightened. We said we were sorry. "You said you were uncomfortable," I replied. "There's a difference." I stood, walked to my desk, and returned with the folder. I set it on the table between us. The soft thud made Ryan flinch. "These," I said, "are records of everything I've contributed over the years. Gifts, loans, support." Brianna stared at the folder like it might bite her. "I'm not asking for it back," I added, watching relief flicker across their faces, "but I am done being taken for granted." Ryan swallowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "that if I'm part of your lives, I'm part of them openly, with respect, no waiting outside, no whispered conversations, and no financial assumptions." Brianna crossed her arms. "So, is that a no?" I smiled then, a small, calm smile that surprised even me. "It's a pause," I said, "and pauses can be very expensive if you don't use them wisely." They left not long after, their goodbye awkward and rushed. As I watched their car pull away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Quiet, steady power. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, the folder still open in front of me. I wasn't done, not even close. Because once you see how people value you, you can't unsee it. And once you decide to value yourself, well, the first crack came from Helen. My sister called 3 days after Ryan and Brianna's visit, her voice unusually tight. She didn't bother with small talk. "Maggie," she said, "did you embarrass them on purpose?" I sat very still in my kitchen chair. The afternoon light was slanting across the floor, catching dust motes in the air. I remember noticing how calm everything looked around me compared to the knot in my chest. "Is that how it was explained to you?" I asked. She sighed. "They said you were upset about the restaurant, and now you're holding things over their heads." That stung more than I expected. Not because it was untrue. I was holding something now, but because of how quickly the story had been flipped. I'd gone from abandoned aunt to unreasonable old woman in record time. "I was told to wait outside," I said quietly. "I was left there." Helen hesitated. Brianna said it was just a misunderstanding. Of course she did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Helen," I said, "do you remember when Tom died and I paid off your credit cards so you could sleep at night?" There was a pause, a sharp inhale. "Yes," she said, "of course I do." Do you remember asking me to co-sign Ryan's student loan? Another pause, longer this time. I'm not bringing this up to collect, I said. I'm bringing it up because I need you to understand something. I have spent decades making things easier for people who don't think twice about making me smaller. The silence on the other end felt heavy, uncomfortable. Finally, Helen said, "What do you want, Maggie?" That question told me everything. "I want respect," I said, "and if that costs me access to people who only valued me for convenience, then so be it." We hung up politely, but something had shifted. I could feel it, like a fault line opening beneath familiar ground. After that, the distance grew fast. Ryan stopped calling entirely. Brianna unfriended me, not blocked, just unfriended, the digital equivalent of a sniff and a turned shoulder. Family gatherings became last-minute cancellations. Photos appeared online of dinners and holidays I hadn't even been told about. And you know what surprised me? The loneliness wasn't as bad as I'd feared. It hurt, yes. There were evenings when the quiet pressed in on me, when I reached for my phone out of habit and remembered there was no one on the other end anymore. But there was also relief, a strange lightness, like setting down a heavy bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. Then came the escalation. A certified letter arrived one Tuesday morning. Ryan's name on the return address. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, the paper crisp and formal. They wanted money. Not a request, a proposal. Pages of legal language outlining a family investment, complete with timelines and expectations. It was dressed up nicely, but at its core, it was the same assumption in a different outfit. You will fund us. You always do. I read it twice. Slowly. Then I laughed, a deep, full laugh that echoed through the house and startled the cat off the couch. That afternoon, I made an appointment with my lawyer. Now, before you judge me, understand this. I didn't go to punish. I went to protect. There's a difference, even if it doesn't look that way from the outside. We reviewed everything, my assets, my will, my accounts. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 40s with kind eyes, listened without interrupting as I told her the whole story. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You're not obligated to fund anyone's lifestyle." "I know," I said, "but I want to be very clear about that, in writing." We made changes, significant ones, trust structures, boundaries, clauses that ensured my money could never again be accessed through guilt, expectation, or manipulation. It felt surreal, like I was finally locking doors in a house that had been open to everyone for too long. A week later, Ryan showed up at my door. No warning, no call. I opened it slowly. He looked thinner, tired, angry in that tight, controlled way that pretends to be calm. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. I'm not heartless. He didn't sit, just paced my living room like a caged animal. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "Why are you turning everyone against us?" I folded my arms. "I'm not turning anyone against you. I'm just not covering for you anymore." "That letter," he started, "was insulting," I finished. "You didn't even ask how I was. You asked how much I could give." He ran a hand through his hair. "You've always helped." "Yes," I said, "because I chose to, not because I was expected to." His voice dropped. "Brianna says you're punishing us." I looked at him then, really looked, the boy I'd held when he cried over his first heartbreak, the man who couldn't meet my eyes when he left me outside a restaurant. "I'm not punishing you," I said softly. "I'm opting out." That stopped him. He stared at me like he'd never considered that possibility. "You can't just walk away from family." I smiled sadly. "Watch me." He left without another word. That night I sat alone again, but this time the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I didn't know then how far the fallout would spread, or how desperate people become when the safety net finally disappears. The thing about boundaries is that the people who benefited most from you having none will always push back the hardest. Chapter 4 didn't begin with shouting or lawsuits or dramatic confrontations. It began quietly, too quietly, and that should have been my first warning. It started with Helen showing up at my door with a casserole. I hadn't seen my sister in person for weeks. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, hair neatly brushed, smile careful, holding that familiar blue dish like a peace offering, my stomach tightened. "I made your favorite," she said softly, "chicken and rice." I stepped aside and let her in. Old habits die slow. She talked about the weather, about her neighbor's knee surgery, about nothing at all. We ate at the kitchen table like we always had, but something was off. She kept glancing at me like she was waiting for a cue. Finally, she set her fork down. "Maggie," she said, "Ryan and Brianna are struggling." There it was. I leaned back in my chair. Struggling how? Helen sighed. The investment fell through. Brianna's parents can't help. They might have to sell the house. I didn't respond. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "You don't have to punish them forever." I gently pulled my hand away. "This isn't punishment." "It feels like it," she said, her voice cracking just enough to sound sincere. I looked at her for a long moment, my little sister, the one I'd protected my whole life, the one who had learned, somewhere along the way, that I would always bend. "Did they ask you to come here?" I asked. Her eyes dropped. That answer hurt more than Ryan's silence ever did. "I'm not cutting them off," I said evenly. "I'm just not funding them." Helen's mouth tightened. "You have more than enough." And there it was, the sentence that finally snapped the last thread. "What I have," I said quietly, "is not the same as what I owe." She left shortly after, casserole untouched in the fridge. I wrapped it up and froze it, unable to throw it away but unwilling to consume it either. Funny how that mirrored the relationship. 2 days later, the real attempt came. I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man introduced himself as a family mediator. Polite voice, professional tone. He said Ryan and Brianna were hoping to resolve tensions amicably and wanted to schedule a session. I thanked him and declined. An hour later, Ryan emailed me a long message. Too long, full of therapy words and half-ownership apologies. "If you felt hurt, that was never our intention. Family should support each other." I read it once, then deleted it. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The final twist came a week later, and this is the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I received a notification from my bank. An attempted access. Not successful, but attempted. Someone had tried to reference an old power of attorney document that should have been void years ago. Ryan's name was on it. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Not because I'd lost anything, I hadn't, but because of what it meant. They hadn't just expected my money. They felt entitled to it. That was the moment grief finally burned off and left only clarity. I called my lawyer the next morning. We locked everything down. New documents, new safeguards, notifications on every account. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I felt calm, surgical. When Ryan found out, he showed up again. This time angry. This time desperate. "You didn't have to go that far," he snapped, standing on my porch like a stranger. "Yes," I said. "I did." "You've changed," he said bitterly. I nodded. "I hope so." Brianna stayed in the car, wouldn't even look at me. That was the last time I saw them. Months have passed now. Holidays came and went. The phone stayed quiet, and something unexpected happened in that silence. I grew. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at the community garden. I traveled alone for the first time in decades. I learned that being generous is a beautiful thing, but only when it's a choice, not a role you're trapped in. Sometimes I think about that night at the restaurant, about standing outside under the glow of the valet lights, feeling small and disposable. They told me to wait outside. So I did, and from that parking lot, I paid a bill that bought me my freedom. If there's a lesson here, it's this: the moment you stop funding disrespect, you find out exactly who was invested in you and who was only investing in themselves.